Okay, so well, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, first speaker of the seminar this semester. Antoine Miech is a senior research scientist at DeepMind. His main research interests are vision and language understanding, and he's mostly known for his work around the How to 100 million dataset. Prior to joining DeepMind, he did his PhD under the supervision of Ivan Leptev and Joseph Civic, and he was awarded the Google PhD Fellowship for his work on video understanding. Antoine has done very interesting work at the intersection of video and language, and he's very familiar with the challenges that large-scale but uncurated data presents. So thanks for coming, Antoine, and all you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and that's a very great pleasure for me to be able to present Flamingo to you. And so I'm presenting, obviously, on the behalf of many people that are included here on the slide. So before I start, so if you, I just want to say that if you have any like question during the talk, feel free to interrupt me. I mean, don't wait before the end if you have any urgent questions. Cool. So, what is Flamingo? So, Flamingo is a visual language model that takes as input a sequence of interleaved text and visual data. So, for instance, you can have such sequence where you have here one picture of a chinchilla, and then you can have a text. This is a chinchilla. They are mainly found in Chile. Then you can have a second image of a dog, and then you can write, this is a Shiba. They are very popular in Japan. You can have a third image and have a flamingo, and then end the sequence with this is, and you can feed basically that to our Flamingo model and get some like sample some text out of it. Like by conditioning the model on this particular interleaved sequence of images and text. And you hope that basically once you condition the language model on that particular sequence of image and text, you kind of get text that somehow is using, like, following the pattern that you provided in the same way as you would do with GPT-3, but here it would be in the multimodal setup. So here, when I'm saying visual data, I mean both images or video. And so, given that pattern, so you can do very cool stuff. So, for instance, you can with our given Flamingo model, you can show this kind of prompt where you can have this handwritten things that we like handwritten arithmetic operation that we took picture of, and after showing each image, you can write the operation and then how you can solve the simple operation. And then at test time, you can have like a last different picture, and then ask the model to basically sample text from this condition on this sequence, and the model is able to really follow this pattern and first like do some OCR, so get the operation and then solve it. And so following this pattern, you can do also you can probe the model for some kind of OCR. And so here we did it with street sign. So here you can see we have this street sign from London. The second one is from the US, and then the third one is actually from France. And you can see that here it's able to read the sign, the street sign. Another example here is where we task the model to basically both identify the animal, but also how many of them you have, and the model is able to follow this pattern and get understand quickly how to solve the task. And I also mentioned that the model is able to ingest videos. So here, so I'm just showing one zero-shot example where the sequence would be one video and one question, and the question will end with the prompt answer. And basically, whenever you prompt a language model with a question and followed by answer, it will tend to basically answer the question. And here, in particular, it's actually conditioned on the video to answer the question. And so basically, it's an instance of video question answering where the model is just answering the question about the video. And so, given that framework, we have seen that actually Flamingo can also engage in visual dialogue out of the box. So here I'm just showing an example of a dialogue that we had with Flamingo, and you can see, so you have so either gray boxes and pink boxes. So So the gray boxes are input from users, so it's from us, and the pink one are actually results from the Flamingo language model. And so you can see that first, I mean, at the beginning we have this picture that we uploaded ourselves, and so that's you might know actually this picture. It's actually a picture from DALL-E 2. It was actually released right, like I think just a few weeks after we released Flamingo. So we were quite sure that this image was not seen at training. And so we uploaded this image, and the model is able to first like have do some captioning, and then we can follow up a conversation here with this with the Flamingo model. So it's just so we have this question. So what are they doing? It says they are having a conversation. What object are they using? It looks like it's a computer. Is this surprising? Yes, it is surprising. Why is this surprising to you? It is because teddy bears are not usually found on the moon. And yeah, so that's one example. One second example I found quite exciting is here. On the right-hand side, you have a particular instance of multiple images, so not just one image. And that's possible because, again, so like the Flamingo language model is basically able to ingest any kind of arbitrarily interleaved image and text. So here, for instance, you can have just a sequence of 3 images and then a bunch of text. And the model is basically able to be conditioned on this full sequence of image and text. So here, in that particular example, I've uploaded 3 instances of flamingos that are of different style. And I'm asking, like, what is the common things about these 3 images? And the model says they are all flamingos. What is the difference between these 3 images? The first one is a cartoon, the second one is a real flamingo, and the third one is a 3D model. And so here you can see that that's actually some kind of like out-of-the-box capability that we can get without having to really train the model to do that. And I will go more in detail later on how we did that. And finally, that's my favorite example from like when I interacted with Flamingo. You might have seen that on Twitter. So that's actually a meme that I have uploaded to Flamingo. So I actually found it quite funny. So I was just curious to see like what Flamingo would get out of it. So I just asked what is funny out of this? What is funny about this meme? And it says this is a hamster on the slide, and it is funny because the hamster is too big to fit in the slide. Yeah, so I mean, you feel that the model is really able to kind of understand both the image content, but also do here some kind of, I guess, OCR already without having to transcribe the text. So we just here in that particular example, we have just given the image, and there was no OCR output provided to the model. So now, before I go and describe the Flamingo approach, I will just do a brief overview of the vision and language related work, which I guess nowadays is quite like it's a very popular field. And one family of approach which is quite which has been very popular since 2018, I would say, are the model based on like some kind of BERT-like models. So here I've tried to list a bunch of them, and I know I must have missed some of them. So here for this kind of models, you are basically, the model is basically a transformer encoder, similarly to what you have in BERT, where you feed a sequence of image and text tokens, and you basically train the model to demask some text token as well as sometimes demask some visual tokens. And so that's trained with paired visual and text data. And once you have, so that's really some kind of, so that's a pre-training task that is then used as a proxy task to later on fine-tune a model on a new task. So here, I would say the downside of these approaches is that these approaches are mostly used for pre-training, but you need some kind of fine-tuning stage to apply this model for any downstream application, except for the particular case of image retrieval. But otherwise, you always need to fine-tune this particular model on a bunch of thousands of examples. Now, more recently, we had this famously called dual encoder contrastive models. So the most famous one is obviously CLIP. And so here, the task is very different. So you have basically 2 encoders. So you have one text encoder and one visual encoder. And they are basically trying to embed these 2 inputs such that when you have a caption that is similar to an image, they should be close in that space, and otherwise they should be far apart. And thanks to that, basically you can derive some downstream tasks in a zero-shot manner, such as image retrieval or image classification. And these methods are great for, and I believe they are state-of-the-art right now to train visual representation. They are excellent for zero-shot retrieval and zero-shot classification. And that's really the strength of these approaches. But the downside is that they are not really able to do some generation. So you are not really able to generate text out of the box. So you are not able to do, for instance, question answering, or you are not able to have some kind of visual dialogue application from these models. So that's, I would say, the downside. And so that's why for Flamingo, we targeted the visual language model family, where instead we have this model that can actually generate text by being conditioned on some kind of visual input. And so you have here, I'm trying to list a bunch of these approaches that are doing that. So trying to basically generate text from vision. And so the main difference, I would say, between Flamingo and all of these approaches is that the main goal of Flamingo is really to make sure that we can adapt Flamingo very quickly to a new task by just showing a few examples, as few as 4 or 8 examples. And that's something that was quite, there was some attempt in some of the work here, but they were not really working well, I would say. So that's really the main focus of Flamingo. So now, I will just give you an overview of the talk. So the first thing I will be talking about is the Flamingo approach. And then I will dive into the main experiment and the main results. And I will be discussing also around, I will have a discussion around the main limitation of the work, and later we can follow up with some questions. So before I start with the Flamingo approach, is there any question or? Okay, I will just continue. So yeah, so that's the approach. So so I will just, so the spirit of the approach is the following. So I mentioned that we have, so here I'm showing 2 types of, you have 2 clouds. So the one on the left-hand side is basically representing the family of contrastive vision models, as I've mentioned before. And so, as I've said before, these are very strong visual language models that are somehow, I think that they are the best to really get good representation out of web image and text data. And again, I've said that they're great, but the downside is that they are not really able to generate text. So they are not able to do captioning, they're not able to do question answering or visual dialogue out of the box. So that's really the main downside, but they are very good at recognizing things and images and aligning recognition to textual concept. And on the other hand side, we have these very strong, large autoregressive language models like GPT-3, Gopher, Chinchilla, Palm. So these are usually these very large, several hundreds of billion parameters language model that are very good to basically generate text, and they have been shown to be very good at some kind of reasoning and some kind of knowledge retrieval. And this is quite appealing because that's something that we also would like to have in vision language model, but that's not currently what we have with models such as Clip or Align. And so basically the spirit of the approach was basically to try to bridge these 2 family of approach to have somehow the best of both worlds. So a very good perception model as well as a very good model that can reason and have very good outside knowledge retrieval capability. So how does it work? So that's basically the model overview. So you can see, maybe at first sight it looks a bit difficult to parse, but maybe first you can look at the bottom of the figure. So that will be the input, so which is a sequence of text interleaved with visual data. So here we have the dog, and then this is a very cute dog, and then the cat picture, and then this is, for instance. So what we do is that we are going to do a very light processing on that sequence, such that whenever we have an image, we just replace the image with a string marker, just to indicate there's an image, and that's it. That's the only thing we do. And then so we have to also for each image we feed each image to a vision encoder. So these images are actually fed to a vision encoder that we're going to pre-train with contrastive learning. So the thing that like the family of model I've shown in the left-hand side before. And we know that they are very great to represent and align, do some kind of alignment between visual data and some kind of textual space. And so here at the end of that vision encoder, we feed the images of the video to what we call a perceived sampler. So that's basically a module that will be basically be able to ingest either images or video and just compress that into a few number of tokens that the language model could then cross-attend to. So you might have noticed that we have also two kinds of colors. So you have the blue and the purple color. So the blue one are actually the blocks that we are going to freeze. So we are going to pre-train in the first stage and then freeze in the Flamingo training. And the purple blocks are the ones that we are actually going to train during the Flamingo training. And they are going to be trained from scratch. So that's the case for the perceived sampler. And then you can see on the right-hand side, you have the main language model decoder block. So you can see you have it's basically a interleaving blue and purple blocks. So the blue blocks that we denote as LM blocks are actually taken from a large language model like GPT-3, for instance. And so these are, for instance, just the self-attention and MLP blocks that you have within this language model. And so we are going to interleave what we call gated cross-attention layers that we are going to train during Flamingo. And their job is basically to make sure that we can inject the visual information into the main frozen language model, such that the language model is somehow aware of the visual information. And at the end, we task the model to basically generate text condition on this sequence of text and visual data. So that's the overview of the approach. And also one thing that is super important for this approach is to have the right training data. And in particular, for Flamingo, we wanted to we focus on only using web scale data. So we didn't use any computer vision dataset that were annotated for machine learning purpose. We try to go on the web and get as many image and text data as possible. And we came up with 3 different datasets that were very crucial to the training of Flamingo. And so the first one are called and are very traditional, are called the image and text pair dataset. So these are just pair of image and text. So usually you have an image and you have a description of the image. And so, for instance, one of the most famous ones right now is lion. So these are just images from the web with alt text data. On the right-hand side, you have what we call video text pair dataset. So it's exactly the same as the image text pair dataset, but instead of having images, you will have videos. And then I would say more like the main novelty here in terms of dataset is what we call the interleaved image and text dataset. So here, this will be sequences of image and text. And so we have collected a dataset called M3W that I will describe a bit later, where we have basically sequence of image, text. And so that's really important to train the Flamingo model. Now, I mentioned that we have this, so you can see on the top right, so I'm just copy pasting the architecture that I've mentioned before, and I will just zoom in the particular modules that I've described. So the first one I've mentioned is the visual encoder. So this one is simple. So it's just a CNN that we have pre-trained with contrastive learning similarly to CLIP. So here, if you're not familiar with CLIP, the task is just given a large number of image and text. We are just trying to match images with corresponding captions. And we're just going to train that on millions and millions of images. And that's a very good task to actually get a very good image encoder that is already somehow aligned with language representation. And so once we have trained that, we use this vision encoder as the one you can see on the top right. And we basically discard this text encoder that we don't use in Flamingo. It's just for us a way to train the visual encoder very quickly. Now, moving on to the visual processing. So I mentioned this perceived sampler. And so one thing that is important to note is that once you have this visual encoder, like here you can see on the bottom, when you have a video that is, so a video is basically a stack of frames, you are going to apply the visual encoder on every frame basically. And if you have a very long video, like let's say a video of like several minutes. You can have as many like the number of spatial temporal features that you get from that video is like is huge. You can get basically 1,000 of features from this kind of video. And if you let's say that, so if you had to just give 1,000 of visual feature to a large language model, it's just not feasible and not tractable computationally. And so we had to think of a way to compress that information, that large number of visual tokens, to a fixed and smaller number of predefined ones. And so here we borrow something similar to the Perseverance model, where instead of feeding all of the blue blocks that you can see here that are representing the visual data, so image or video, we are basically going to learn latent queries that are going to cross-attend to these visual features. And so here, this learn latent are as few as, in practice, we have only 64, but you can have 32 or even 16 tokens. And they are going to represent the visual data, so either image or video, for the language model. And so at the output of this, you get as many visual tokens as you have of learn latent queries. So in practice, we have only 64 tokens. So we can basically compress like as many as 1,000 of tokens to as few as 64 tokens. And these are going to be fed to this large language model that I'm going to describe next. So that's really the main bulk, like the main component of the Flamingo model, which is the stack of language model decoding step. So here I'm just zooming into one of these like purple and blue block, which are just one instantiation of one gated cross-attention dense and one language model layer. So I'm just zooming into one block just to explain a little bit better. So here you can see on the top, on the bottom, that's basically the text input that we are going to feed to the language model. And on the left-hand side, you have the X, which is the vision input. And X is basically the output of the Perseverance sampler, which are just these 64 tokens I mentioned. And so here, basically, the way we are just injecting the visual information is just through some cross-attention, where we are just having, so the queries are going to be the text token, and the key and values are going to be the visual token from the Perseverance sampler. And the goal of this layer is just to inject visual data into the main language model. And then once that's done, we have the follow-up layer is the language model layer. That's just the language model layer that we can have from GPT-3 or Chinchilla. And the job is just to do the self-attention and the MLP. And that's basically the detail on the right-hand side. So you can see more detail about what's how the cross-attention mechanism is working. And the reason why we are calling that gated cross-attention dense is that you might have noticed that after the cross-attention and after the feed-forward layer of the purple blocks, we have something called tannage gating. And so that's basically a scalar that we are going to multiply to each of these learn and added layers, such that when we start the model training, we initialize this gating to 0, such that when you initialize this gating to 0, basically, if you do the math, basically you are going to have the initialized network looks like something like that, where basically it's like you are basically bypassing every purple layers, and you are just basically feeding all of the text token to the language model layers only. And that's basically because we want to start with a very good language model, which is the one that we have pretrained. And basically, the goal of this gate is basically to increase as long as you train, so going from 0 to a non-zero value, so such that you progressively transition from a language model to a visual language model. And we found that was quite important for stability, because if you start with, if you don't have this gate, basically you have a very bad initialization, I would say. Yeah, let me know if that's not clear, but otherwise I will continue. So that's the main building blocks of the.
Yeah.
Wait, is it unmuted?
Yeah, you know, you can.
So that's the. Is there a question?
Okay, quick. So, did you try, or I assume you did, but just did you train from scratch completely? So without the pre-trained frozen layers, just this architecture, start from random initialization. How bad is that? And do you have any hypotheses on, like, is that something that can be got around with more data, or is it just the initialization is so bad unless you start with this that it's unsolvable?
Yeah, so basically, the thing that we wanted to rely on a very large language model. So when I'm saying large, I meant like potentially a few hundred billion parameters, and these are extremely costly to train. And if you think about it, even if you just like want to store the gradient of these parameters, it's already like we need a large number of GPU or TPU to just be able to just save this parameter in just save the gradient of these parameters. And the thing is, I mean, if we don't freeze this layer, I mean, it's just going to be too expensive for us to train the model, which is different if you freeze these layers. You don't need to store the gradient for this particular layer, and you can only have a much cheaper training. So that's the first thing. So it's cheaper to train. And the second thing is that it's actually very, very hard to train this language model. And we have teams at DeepMind that are just optimized to just train this language model because they need very careful tuning. And so it's not like trivial to train something like that from scratch. So basically, once a very good language model is trained, it's a bit, it would be a bit bad not to try to reuse it. And we have some experiment on the ablation study showing that if we actually even try to take the same language model but even fine tune it, so you don't even start from scratch, it's worse than if you keep it frozen. So I would think that it would be even worse if you started from scratch.
Makes sense.
So yeah, now I'm just going to dive into how we are doing like the cross attention when we have a sequence of image and text, and that's something that's a bit tricky to do. So here I'm just I will be just zooming on one of these gated cross attention dense that will be, adding this visual information into the main stack of transformer. So here let's say that we start with this sequence of text and image. So again, as I've mentioned, we are going to process that data such that whenever we have an image, we are going to replace the image with a placeholder. Here we just have this image marker, and we are going to tokenize this text, and then that we get a bunch of tokens. So these are like basically the things that get into the self attention and cross attention as queries. And you can see on the right hand side you have the different images from this sequence that are going to be processed by first vision encoder and then the perceiver sampler. And so here we are going to so the attention pattern is the following. So whenever we have a text, so here you can see cute pics of my pets. You can see that there is no there is no image before that text, and so and you can see that, for instance, for the second text, my puppy sitting on the grass, you can see the previous image is this image of a dog. And so the attention pattern that we are going to follow is just that each text token will be only allowed to cross attend to the previous image. For instance, so here, if you have my puppy sitting on the grass, this text token will only be able to cross attend to the previous, like this picture of a dog. The tokens for my cat looking very dignified is only going to cross attend to the picture of the cat, and the one that we start, like the header, will not even cross attend to any image. So you might say that's a bit weird, because I've shown before like some example of like I've shown an example of a dialogue where I've shown three flamingos, and the model was able to somehow like reason about these three images. So you might think, how is it possible that you can like basically reason about on the three images, but you only cross attend to one image? And that's a very valid question. And the reason why we have multi-image reasoning is that, so if you only have one cross-attention layer, basically each token will only cross-attend to one image. That's correct. But then after this cross-attention layer, we are going to stack self-attention layers. So these are the blue blocks. And the self-attention layer are just, so the goal is just to mix match all of the information from the text tokens. And so basically, if you do self-attention after that, you are going to have information flowing between all of the images, because you are going to do self-attention between the tokens from the second image and the self-attention between, you are going to cross-attend to also text from the first image. And that's where you are going to have some multi-image interaction. And as long as you stack these layers, you are going to have more and more interaction. And so that's basically how we deal with like multiple images. And the second reason why we do that is this means that we are not bound to, like, we basically at training, we in practice, we only train with a maximum sequence of 5 images because of computational issue, but also memory issue. And the thing is, we are going to show that at test time, the model can generalize much more than 5 images. And the reason why you can do this generalization is because we don't necessarily, like, we don't model that we have n images, but we model that we just cross-attend to one image at a time. And that means that we can have many more images at test time than at training time. Okay, so now I will be diving into what we call the Flamingo family. So here I will be showing the smallest model we have, which is the Flamingo 3 billion parameter. And I will be, so here I'm just showing this pie chart where this is representing the parameter count overall of the model based on different components and whether or not they are frozen. And so you can see, like the majority of the the biggest component is the language model, as you can see on the right hand side, and which is frozen. Then you also have the vision encoder, which will freeze, and that's still actually like it's small compared to the language model, so it's only 13% of the parameter count. And then you have on the left, you have these modules that we train, so the perseverance sampler and the gated cross-attention layers. And so basically, we have more frozen parameter than parameter that we train actually. And the philosophy of how we scale the Flamingo family is just that we are mainly going to scale this language model on the right hand side. So for instance, we have the Flamingo 9B where we grow even more this language model. So you can see it's taking more of this parameter count. And the vision encoder and the perseverance sampler is going to stay the same. So we are not going to scale that for the Flamingo family. And the extreme is when we go to the Flamingo 80B, and where basically the language model is taken from the Chinchilla 70B language model. And you can see that if you look at this chart pie, basically this language, like all of the parameters are mostly for this language model stack. And you can see that the vision encoder that is frozen is not even representing like 1% of the language model. So that's something that surprised a lot of people, but that's actually something that works decently and that we take into account visual information. And in practice, for the vision encoder, we use an NFNet F6, so it has 500 million parameters. And again, so the resampler is also fixed, so it's quite small overall. So now I'll be diving into the training data. So that's really something that is, I would say, as important as the model architecture, because without the training data, we don't have something that could work basically. And so the main novelty here is the dataset that we call M3W, which stands for Massive Multimodal Web Dataset. And so the way we constructed this dataset is, so we basically targeted a bunch of web pages where we have at least 1 or 2 images. So here you have one example on the left-hand side. Now we have an algorithm in-house where we can actually process this web page such that we only take into account the main text body. So here you can see it's basically discarding all of the advertisement and all of the things that are not interesting and just taking the main text that is relevant to the web page. And also we only keep the images that are interesting. So here you can see that for these are mainly these 3 images that you can see, that these vegetables with weird shapes and this strawberry. And you can see that's basically what we keep after the processing. So we have the main text, and also we have, whenever we have an image, we have an image placeholder. And obviously we also download the image such that we can basically have like store the image for each placeholder. And so we managed to do that for roughly 44 million of web pages. And in total for each web pages, so we have on average, we have 4 images, which sums up to roughly 180 million images for that particular data set. Now, we also have, as I've mentioned, we have to mix that data set with other data set. And so we have to also include these more traditional, I would say, vision language data sets, which are paired like vision and text data. So here we have a set of 2 billion image and text data sets. So it's very similar to Lion, basically, if you know Lion. On the right-hand side, we have the same for video, but this data set is much smaller because it's much more difficult to get that kind of video at scale. And so that's basically the main like data that we use to train Flamingo. And I'm going to show later that that's very important to have this mix of data. So now,
so quick question. So so how do you go from kind of these data sets to like creating the sequences? Is there anything special that you do there? The training sequences.
You mean the process from going to the web pages to this like middle web page? Or?
So now it seems like you have like maybe some image text pairs, but when you train Flamingo, it's ultimately sequences, right? So you just randomly sample different image text pairs and kind of concatenate them, or is there something else?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Sorry, yeah, I didn't mention that, but so whenever we have these so a sample from this particular M3W dataset, so basically we are going to have a sequence of text and image that we use to train the model. But when we only have this pair of image and text or video and text data, the sequence will be very simple. So it will be just an image followed by a text, and that's it. We are not going to concatenate many images to have like a sequence of image text. The sequence will only be sampled from this particular M3W dataset, and the pair dataset are just creating very simple sequences of just one image or one video and one simple caption. And the reason why we are doing that is that these dataset, like these captions are like these paired image and text or video and text dataset are very great because there is a very strong alignment between the vision data and the description. And that's not necessarily true with this M3W dataset, where if you just get a random web page and get the sequence of image and text, sometimes like the image has like the text sometimes has nothing to do with the image, and that's most of the case. And so we needed to have this kind of consistency of like being able to describe an image from this pair of image and text dataset. And the motivation of having this sequence of data is just such that we can model also a sequence like for having the Flamingo ability.
I'm sorry, I have a related question to that. So the masked cross-attention layer only allows the text tokens to attend to the prior image, but yes, in like many web pages, like in the example one there, like the title will appear before the image. Do you do any kind of like pre-processing on the DOM to correct for that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So yeah, it might be the case that sometimes you describe the image on the top of the image and you don't do it after. And so we know that that's something that happens quite a lot. And so we had some data augmentation strategy where sometimes we just jitter the order of the text. So it can happen that sometimes with 50% of chance it's before or sometimes it's after. And that's we are going to see. I mean, we saw on the evaluation study that it's actually beneficial to have this augmentation.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right. So now,
sorry about that. Yeah, can I ask a quick question? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
So again, in the previous slide, so you mentioned before in the talk that you trained on at most 5 images, but like a lot of these web pages, like this one says that there's like 16 funny shaped fruits. And so do you just like you just stop like looking at it after 5 images? Do you make any like corrections for the numbers to align with each other? Because Flamingo can also count very well, right?
Yeah, so yeah, whenever we have more than 5 images, we are just going to randomly take a chunk of the web page. So, and the chunk will have at most 5 images.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's also, I mean, we also have the limitation of the number of tokens that we can fit to the language model. So it's not just that we are limited in the number of images, but we are also limited in the size of the text. So we have two constraints.
Okay, thank you.
So going to the experiment. So yeah, so in terms of evaluation dataset, we have two kind of benchmarks. So we have the image and the video benchmark that are equally spread across the board. So in terms of image and video benchmark, we also have many tasks. Some of them are captioning, as you can see on the top. We also do have many visual question answering dataset. So VQA-V2, MSVDQA, XQA. We have some multi-choice visual question answering dataset. We do have some classification tasks, even visual dialogue and action retrieval task. And so here, these are all tasks that you can basically repurpose as some kind of visual language task. And that's how we could actually, the goal is basically to tackle them in a few shot setup where we are not going to train on any of these data sets. And just shows a few examples in the prompt as I've shown before. And yeah, so in terms of segmentation, so here, in terms of like tasks, so you have what we call open-ended task, where the model is tasked to sample, like to generate text. So this is the case for captioning or for some kind of question answering dataset where you have to generate the answers. But you also have closed-ended task where the model is tasked to choose between different answers. So it can be multi-choice question answering, or it can be classification where you have to choose one class. And at the end, so I mentioned that we are not going to train on any of these data sets. We are only going to do few-shot learning. But at some point, you need to validate the model. You cannot just apply the model without any validation, like design decision validation. So we had to select at least a few benchmarks where we allow ourselves to tune some parameters, like I don't know, the learning rate or the number of layers. And so these are the 7 benchmarks that we use, and that we know that maybe the performance is going to be not real few-shot learning because we use some validation data to do some design decision. But overall, we saw later that we analyzed that didn't impact overall it didn't bias the performance to better performance than other data sets. So the main result is the following. So these are the few-shot results with the largest Flamingo model in the 32-shot regime. So I'm showing like all of the benchmarks I've mentioned on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have the normalized performance relative to the previous fine-tuned state of the art at the time of the paper. And basically, you can see also that there is one like horizontal line, which is the 100% line, and this is basically the performance that you need to reach if you basically are on par with the fine-tuned state of the art. And you can see that on 6 benchmark, we are with the Flamingo ATB 32-shot evaluation, we are actually better than the fine-tuned state of the art, which is something that I think it was the first time we got, like we had visual language models that were outperforming fine-tuned models in few shot. And for the rest, obviously, there are many benchmarks where we are not like outperforming the fine-tuned state of the art, and we are still below. Nevertheless, the thing to remember is that we also plot the previous 0 or few-shot state of the art, where the setting is somehow the same as us. And if you compare to this particular setup, we are consistently better than the previous state of the art, which is, to me, also one of the key takeaways here. And in terms of scaling and like with respect to model size and number of shots, so here I'm showing in x-axis when we scale the number of shots, and we also, like on the y-axis, we have some kind of average aggregated performance with all of these benchmarks normalized to the SOTA performance. And you can see that, yeah, so basically it's not a surprise that the larger the model, the better, but also like the more shot, the better. And it seems that the largest model is better at utilizing a large number of shots. So you can see that a better jump between 16 shots and 32 shots with the large Flamingo model than with the smaller one. That they become somehow saturated very quickly. Now, I mentioned that the data set that we have are very important, and I will just emphasize that why they are so important. So here we have an ablation study where So that's done on the Flamingo 3B model. So it's the smallest model we have. And we are going to show some kind of aggregated score on the 4-shot performance. So here on the top, you see this is the model that is trained on the mixture of all the dataset I mentioned. So the video dataset, the image and text dataset, and this interleaved image and text dataset. So that's basically the baseline, and it gets 68%. Now, if you take that model and instead of training on all of the dataset, you remove the video dataset, you get a slight decrease in performance. So it's not a huge one, but it's still a significant. So the reason why it's not huge is so it's twofold. So the first one is that it didn't impact the image benchmark, but mostly the video one. And second is that this video dataset is quite small compared to the rest of the training dataset, so its impact is quite limited. Now it's even like the drop is worse when we instead remove the image and text dataset, which has 2 billion images. As you can see, the drop is quite significant. So, and that really indicates that it's very important to get a dataset where we have well-aligned and well-descriptive captions that describe images. And finally, and that's maybe the key takeaway, like the third key takeaway of this talk, is that when we actually remove this interleaved image and text dataset, you get this huge drop of performance. And that's something so the reason why it's dropping that much is that because we actually, once we remove that dataset, we basically lose the few-shot ability. The model is not able to do few-shot learning. And that's why you are basically, I mean, it's basically like as if you are just doing zero-shot inference. And yeah, so that's just to give you like an idea of the importance of having this dataset, although we are a bit skeptical at the beginning when we collected this dataset, because when we look at the data, it looks so noisy, and like the text data was so not correlated with the images that we thought that it was just going to not work. But at the end, it sounds like it was the most important thing to get the few-shot learning possible. And last ablation study I want to show is this one. So if someone mentioned that, how about if you just train the language model from scratch and you just don't care about freezing or pre-training it? So here I'm just showing the same kind of ablation study with the same model. The top one is the baseline where we freeze the language model parameter that is based on the smaller chinchilla model. And then the bottom line is basically when you take the same model, but you don't freeze it, so you allow to fine-tune it at training. And surprisingly, you see that it's actually worse when you allow to fine-tune it. And that's the reason why we think we are dropping in performance is that we believe that's an instance of catastrophic forgetting, where the model is basically losing some of its ability that it has nicely learned from the language model pre-training. And some of them are, for instance, outside knowledge retrieval. So we have some benchmark like OKVQA, where the task is basically outside knowledge retrieval. And we have seen that basically having a very good pre-trained language model is key to get good performance. Otherwise, you lose that performance when you just train on image and text data. And the third and last result here is the one you basically train the language model from scratch, and that's basically what someone asked, and that's even worse. So it's both worse when you fine-tune the model, the language model, but it's also much more computational to do that. And freezing the language model was actually a way for us to get a much cheaper training, because you don't have to update to get some gradients for this large language model. So yeah, I think we had somehow the best of both worlds with that approach. And last kind of quantitative result I want to show is that we obviously focus on few-shot learning, but we also wanted to see if we could just fine-tune the Flamingo model. When I'm saying fine-tuning, I'm just fine-tuning the modules that we were actually training at train time. So we are not still fine-tuning the language model or the vision encoder, just the main blocks that we were allowed to train at training. And so you can see that, like, obviously, if you fine-tune, like, you can compare the first row and the second row, you get a huge boost between fine-tuning and few-shot. So obviously, I mean, fine-tuning is not dead. I mean, there's still a gap between few-shot learning and fine-tuning. And for some of the benchmark with fine-tuning, we were able to get state-of-the-art number where we were not able to do so with few-shot learning. So that's the good thing about this fine-tuning results. So now that's the end for the quantitative results. Now I will just give you some more qualitative results. So here, I mean, I guess, so I will just show some input prompt where we have an image and a question. And that's basically prompting the model for question answering in a zero-shot manner. And you can see for this particular example, we are trying to task the model for some kind of outside knowledge retrieval. And you feel that with like, so for this particular example, it will be very difficult to get this right without having a generic language model that has some kind of knowledge of the world and not just being able to caption just an image purely based on the visual data. And also in terms of video results, so here I'm just showing some zero-shot video question answering result where I'm just showing a few frames and showing the question and the answer. And you can see that so for some of them require the model to understand several frames, like the last two rows, for instance. You need basically to see all the frames to answer the question, and that's really like that's what's happening. And in particular, I really like this example where when we wrote Flamingo on a piece of paper and we recorded that we took a phone and we recorded this piece of paper, but just zooming on a few words, so that you are not seeing all of the word in one frame. But if you basically aggregate over all the frames, you are basically able to understand that it's written Flamingo here. And now, so just to get back to this visual dialogue AI, so you might ask, how is it possible that you can just out of the box, without training, just do visual dialogue without without training? And the reason why we are able to do that is thanks to this few-shot prompting ability, where here we, similarly to what people do with GPT-3, where we have where they have a chatbot, they basically have a prompt that somehow indicate that the AI should be behaving like a chatbot basically. And so the prompt that we add, the only prompt that we add before like all of the generated samples is this one, and that's something that we hid from the illustration. But so here it's basically saying that Flamingo should behave as a visual AI that can see images and that can like have a conversation over the images. And to give some example, we provided some images that were from our like images, and we also wrote what we expect from Flamingo. So these are not Flamingo outputs. This is what we expect from Flamingo. So that's something we wrote, and you can see. So this is an image of us, and we wrote like some things that we expect Flamingo to do, and we do that for like just 3 images. And these images were not optimized for any kind of visual dialogue benchmark. We just took 3 random images from our library. And we just had this prompt, and then that's where the magic happens. So basically, like after that, you can just add new images. Like here, this picture of, I guess, I mean, you better know here. So it's this street sign from New York, and you can say which city is this, and it says this is a street sign in New York City, and you can, you follow up with more questions, and the model is really able to behave like a visual AI because it has been prompted to do so. And that's I think that's really what I like the most about Flamingo is that it's very easy to change its behavior by showing a few examples, and everybody can do that. And you don't need to be a machine learning engineer to do that. You can be any like my model can do that, so it's very easy to do that. And yeah, so here I'm showing one example where I was quite excited about. So here I uploaded a bunch of images. So here these were just 4 like ingredients, and I asked, what can I make with this ingredient? And it says you can make a BLT sandwich, which is actually true because it's containing all of these ingredients. And yeah, last thing. So if you haven't seen Star Wars, and you don't want to be spoiled, maybe you can just don't listen. So I added these 2 images of Star Wars, and you can ask what is their family relationship, and yeah, I mean you can see that here it's doing both multi-image reasoning, but also outside knowledge retrieval, and that's something that I was quite excited about. Yeah, and last thing, yeah, about the visual AI. So what about if you just change the prompt? And that's something that we got asked on Twitter. So someone asked, what about if you just ask Flamingo to be some like a visual AI that is obsessed by giraffe? And so someone from the team just changed a little bit the prompt so that you can hint the model that it's just obsessed with giraffe somehow. So you can say, so you can see here, I had underlined the modification in red, so such that you can see where we we had changed the behavior of the Flamingo model such that it's somehow obsessed by giraffe. And now when we uploaded new images, so you can see here we have an image of a cat from someone from the team. And you can see here, yeah, so it's basically having a totally different behavior, and it's trying to be like obsessed with giraffe. And at the end, if you do the job of uploading this picture of giraffe, the Flamingo model starts to be very happy. So that's really showing how very easy it is to adapt it to given a few number of images and text. And now I will just briefly go to the limitation of the work, and yeah, so the main first limitation is classification. So it's not state of the art compared to the clip-like model. So, and the reason why it's not as good is that the model has not been optimized to do to choose like different options. It has just been trying to to optimize the likelihood of sequences. So it's very good for generating samples, but it's not like outperforming the state-of-the-art classification models. But maybe that's fine because now, I mean, I guess these models are quite saturating the classification benchmark. Second limitation is hallucination, and that's mainly because we are relying on these large language models. So here I'm just showing an example where the answer is not really grounded in the image, and you can see that, like here, for instance, if you have this picture of a phone and there is nothing on the screen, and you ask what is on the phone screen, the model is saying a text message from a friend, and that might be due to the language model bias that knows that, I mean, it's very probable, very likely that from like if you look at the phone screen, you might have a text message from a friend. Also, it's kind of sad that because we have just trained that widely on the web, it's not very good at spatial understanding. So yeah, here I'm just showing like a very bad failure case where you can say what is on the left of this picture, and it's just very bad at understanding disentangling the left to the right. So I think we can address that if you had some annotated data where it's very targeted to spatial understanding, but right now we didn't allow ourselves to use that kind of data. And finally, sometimes it needs a bit of hinting to understand complex scenes. So here we had this famous example of this picture of Barack Obama, and it was kind of able to get the gist of the picture, but still we had to hint a lot the model to get it right. And the last thing I want to mention is the limitation of in-context learning. So yeah, that's like I've mentioned that the model performance is saturating with as few as 32 shots and 64 shots, and that's a bit of pity because sometimes you can have 100 and 1,000 of example, but there's no way you can get a large improvement with few shot learning. And also it's very slow when you have a lot number of shots, so it's not very practical to have few shot learning with hundreds of examples. So you still at some point need fine-tuning if you have thousands of examples. Yeah, so that's it for the talk. I don't know if, I guess we are almost right on time. But if you have any other questions, happy to take them.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for this. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about, in terms of the diversity of the training set, in case, for example, you were to train on something where it was all of the same form, like the cat from blank, the flamingo from blank, the giraffe from blank, and then you give it some entirely different object that doesn't really fall under that type of sentence, like a table or a cup. How does it respond in those sort of situations? Does it try to say the cup is from like India or something?
You mean, yeah, you mean for few shot learning?
Yeah.
It will try to do its best at fitting the pattern, but sometimes it's possible that there is no like correlation between the test image and the few shot from that you show. So whenever it's possible, it will try to do the job, but when it's not possible, it will just try to do something different. But yeah, it depends on how different how out of domain the last image is, I would say.
Got it. So like, how would you approach that sort of situation where maybe the image you're giving it is really different than what it's seen before, and it might end up saying something that doesn't make much sense?
So, I mean, the way we are doing that is somehow addressing that is basically to put more example in the prompt. Like instead of having 4, it's reasonable to provide the 42 example. It's not a lot of work, and usually you can see a large bump in performance. So with the 32 shot, we kind of expect that you can have a quite representative distribution of what you expect. I mean, but so that's one like easy solution. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, we still need to have this assumption that the test images should be somehow, or the test image or the text that is following the image, so should be somehow similar. But I mean, the models can still somehow behave differently when it's totally different, and I think it really depends. It's very a case by case thing.
Got it. Thank
like,
you.
For instance, so for this example, like of so here for the street sign. So if you look at the few shot example before, I mean, nothing was related to New York or street sign, but so it was there was only a graph, a picture of us having dinner, and a cat. So there is no relation, but the model is still able to. There's a bit of generalization here.
Yeah, let's do one quick last question. Or if it's very fast, maybe two. Dima, you had a question.
Yes, hi. So my question is for the vision encoder. So I think you mentioned you trained it from scratch. So I'm just interested to know why did you train it from scratch? And the other question is, why do you choose ResNet over the vision transformers?
Yes, so we trained from scratch because we wanted. I mean, we pre-trained the model from scratch because we wanted to have the best models. So if you want to have the best model, you obviously don't want to pre-train on something that is. I mean, if you take something that you want to pre-train on, it should indicate that that's actually the best model you have. So we wanted to start from like to get the best model. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that at the time we don't use ResNet but NFNet. And at the time of the publication, I mean, NFNet was performing on par with VIT. But that's not the case anymore if you go to the very large-scale regime of a few billions parameters, and that's something that makes sense. I mean, to move to VIT if you want to scale the vision encoder.
And Antoine, thanks so much for your talk. I had a meta-level question for you, which is, if you were starting your PhD right now, what would you work on? Because I mean, I think all the Flamingo and Clip has been, very transformative, and it changes the game a little bit. And so I'm curious, kind of what do you think a new PhD student should start working on? Kind of given the context of Flamingo and everything, and more these models are going to continuously improve as well.
So are you hinting the fact that these work are very difficult to do in academia because it's like just a lot of resources and like there's no way.
Right. Yeah. That sort of could be some part of the. I think some students in the group have a crisis, wondering what is the role if we can't train all these models. So I was just kind of curious on your take here.
Yeah. So I think, although I totally agree that there are things that would be very difficult to achieve as PhD student, there are still things that you can. I mean. There are still I'm seeing like these language models that are becoming more and more open source now, and I think once they're become open source, I think there's a lot of work on how on better understanding them, better analyzing them, and especially the value cases and the biases. So these are things that we can I would say we could fairly do as PhD student, and I think it's very exciting because there are so many things we still don't understand about these models. It's sometimes a bit mysterious. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, I mean, apart from large language model, I think, I mean, it looks like there's a lot of research with, I'm seeing a lot of very nice research with NORF-like models where it's kind of doable to do in academia, and I'm seeing a lot of great work from academia. So, and I think there are still a lot of work to do in with respect to 3D. So I would say 3D would be also, I mean, I would be excited also if I was a student to work on 3D. And yeah, so I think, and I guess you must have seen all of the work in generative modeling, so with images, and again, we are seeing more and more open source models. So I think it will. There are still a lot of things that we don't understand about this model, and because they are becoming open source now, it's a great opportunity for us, I guess, to analyze them and to better understand why sometimes it's working and why sometimes it's just totally failing. And yeah, I would just bet on better understanding these models. But that's just my take.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Antoine. So let's thank Antoine once more, and thanks so much for coming, Antoine.
Thank you.